Okay. This is Pepper and Laura, and we are visiting you guys on the Armchair Traveler. And, we kind of started last time with just letting you join into the conversation about different ways to travel. And last time we did some physical traveling. This time we're going to do some mental traveling, which is like back in time traveling.
Yeah.
So today,
way back in time.
Laura keeps saying things like she's old, and you guys give a thumbs down.
I just celebrated a birthday, and I kept it secret. There's a certain point in the calendar when you start going backwards instead of forwards. It's not a celebration.
Actually, we're going to do today. We're going to go backwards today.
Yeah, but this is a good thing. Yes, Pepper is so clever and creative with these things. I can't wait. She didn't tell me what she's going to talk about, so I can't wait to hear.
So we are going to talk. Both Laura and I, as you guys may know, are both from the Appalachian Mountains, and the Appalachian Mountains are a mountain range that travel from Georgia. They span from Georgia through North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Virginia, all the way up into Pennsylvania and New York. But each section of the Appalachian Mountains have a special name. So I live in the Blue Ridge section of the Appalachian Mountains. So lots of times you'll hear me talk about the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I think, are yours the Blue Ridge too, Laura?
Well, we just call them the Appalachians.
Okay.
We don't really, and it depends on where you are. I mean, there's a mountainous region of Kentucky, and you have Cumberland Gap where Daniel Boone and a bunch of settlers came in, or Boone Gap. And then you get onto the fertile plains of the bluegrass. So it's quite different. And like Pepper said, every region has a different history. They have different names for their mountains, even though it's the same chain.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty interesting.
It is very interesting. And the one thing, though, there's a lot of commonality, too, which has been really interesting. You have people up in Pennsylvania who are maybe in the Allegheny range of the Appalachian Mountains. And there are similar wording of things that as there are down in the Smoky Mountains. Which
a lot of our ancestors traveled. I mean, my ancestors traveled from North Carolina and Virginia from the 1600s into Kentucky. So you get all that history and culture coming with them into different regions, especially the Scots.
Yes, and I would say too, yours is probably the same way. In that the 1600s, 1700s, there were only certain ports you could come into if you were an immigrant, and most of them were either through New Jersey or through Plymouth,
Virginia,
and in Virginia. So there were these main places where people were coming. So I have a lot of people who came through Pennsylvania and through. I can go all the way back to Plymouth Plantation with mine on the Mayflower even. And so we had people coming from all areas that ended up in the Appalachian Mountains in some form or fashion. And a lot of them, I know for Laura too, a lot of mine were Scots and English and Irish. So that was a big part of mine. So anyway, Appalachia is known for being 100 years behind everywhere else. Now, I have to say that probably within the last 30, 40 years, the speed at which it's moved into the modern age has been much faster. But if you had visited Appalachia 100 years ago, it would have probably been very similar to what Appalachia was 50 years before that or 70 years before that. There wasn't a lot of change, or the culture was very insular. And still in a lot of places, and still in some places in Appalachia, you can go and there's this insular feel of people who have been apart from outside of the world. They keep to themselves. They know their own people and protect their own people. And don't you think
they often resist change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's good to that and there's bad to that, just like there are to most things. And the good to that is the deep loyalty, the culture is so rich,
the continued traditions.
Yeah,
Yes, families lived near each other, not so scattered as today.
exactly. So there was this real unity feeling, this real, just like in Scotland. I mean, this is true for Scotland. Family is like core, and that's still true in places in Scotland that are more in the country, in the rural areas. That feel of loyalty to family, loyalty to your favorite football team, whatever the case may be.
It did, and it even trumped your political allegiance. Even if you and your kin in Scotland weren't on the same page politically, you came before your political leanings. You came before the king or queen or whatever. Fascinating, fascinating. Blood is thicker than water.
For sure, and caused lots of interesting conflict. So, so anyway, just to give you the idea, we're talking about some memories we have from Appalachia when we were children. And one of my favorite memories that I have, just as it was a cultural thing for me, was going fishing. And I mean, we started with the old-fashioned fishing poles that was basically just a pole and string with a hook on the end. And we started there when we were very small, 5, 4, something like that. And near my granny's house. Now, yeah, I'll talk a lot about my granny Spencer because she is probably one of the most important people in my history, in my life.
What a novel-worthy name, Granny Spencer. It's like something out of Christie.
Okay, well, you got to hear this. Okay, this is even funnier. Her parents' names were Ed and Kate Surratt. Okay, and Surratt is French. 3 French brothers came into the area and settled in different places in the area, and so it's a pure Surratt line up to my great grandparents, and they were called Granny and Papa Rat because people didn't want to say the Surratt.
Nobody said Surratt.
No, they're just the Rat. So I even know them as Papa Rat. So if you guys hear me say Papa Rat, it's because I'm talking about Surratt.
Surratt.
And Ed Surratt is actually he was the model for my father in Marl's Dream. The stories you hear about his alcoholism are based on stories Granny told me growing up. And so Ed Surratt, my great grandfather, yes, my great grandfather, is his story is very much alive in Laurel's Dream as Laurel's father. So
that's why it's so rich. If you haven't read it, read that one. It is. I love Pepper's books, but that one is my favorite so far. And I think because it's so rooted in your own personal heritage, and it's just so rich, you just feel like you're there.
Right.
Wonderful.
It was such an honor to get to write that book. I think that's why it's special to me. And it's not going to be your best book you've ever read if you read it. But there's something about it that
so satisfying.
Yeah. And there's a lot of truth, history, family history based in that. But anyway, so what we would do as kids is my Granny Spencer had a pond beside her house, and her house was here. And you would walk up a hill to my Papa and Granny Rat's house. Well, they weren't alive whenever I was little, but their house was still there. This little bitty, tiny square house that was made of red brick-ish, and it was like this big. You looked at it, you're like, how could a whole family fit into that house? So in between Granny and Papa Rat's house and my Granny Spencer's house was this pond. And we would go fishing at that pond. Dad said we had to start there before we got to go to the big time. And the big time was the lake that was a few miles away. That was big time fishing. But the pond started us out small because Dad was thinking that if somebody got pulled in, it'd be easier to rescue them. And so we would go, and I don't know how your families are, but for mine, you had to learn everything. You caught your own worms. You had to put your worms on your hook. You had to take the fish off the hook if you caught one.
Did you have to clean them too?
No, we were little, we didn't have to clean them. And then the great thing about my dad being a little bit of a cleaning perfectionist was that if we didn't do it well, he'd just take it away from us and he'd do it himself. So I could really pretend not to do it well if I needed to. And so so anyway, so that's one of my first memories. And what we would do is Mom would pack us a little snack. And then for lunch, we would go down to Granny Spencer's house and eat lunch and go back fishing. And what usually ended up happening is we would catch hardly anything and have the only thing we'd really catch was sunburn. And then but it was the time. I mean,
Yes.
I think that's one thing that I've missed for my children is the pacing of what's important in Appalachia with time. And I know that for me, marrying somebody who didn't have as rich Appalachian heritage as me, doing things like we would eat lunch and immediately the plan was you wash dishes and you go on about your stuff. But in my family, we would eat lunch, dishes would stay on the table and people would sit and talk for hours. And then they would do the dishes after the
Never consulted the clock like today. No, time didn't really matter.
No, and you worked hard. When you worked hard and you put your all into it. But when you didn't work and you were with family, everything slowed. And you spent that time, it was like you were soaking in that time in a way that I think we've lost part of that in our current culture. When you leave that part of the world, you kind of lose that part. But I've heard, and you might know better than me, I've heard that when you go into certain places in like English countryside or Scotland or Ireland, there's this slow down pace that goes back to that where people aren't in such a hurry when you get back to the rural areas.
I hope so. I think so. It feels different when you're there. Americans also are known for this frantic pace. We also are known internationally, unless it's changed, as taking less vacation time. Our English counterparts in other parts of the world take a lot more vacation time. America, we're just seen as these driven teenagers here. And we really are teenagers in terms of our history. You know, we're not centuries and centuries old. So I'm all for
vacation time. I'm okay with that. I don't mind taking my vacation time. How about you?
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I'm tired of clock watching. This is great.
Okay. You have one you're going to share.
Okay. Well, I think of two, and I'll try to make it brief. One thing, it's so interesting that your memory is about your granny and my memory is about my granny. I've dedicated my first book to her, The Frontiersman's Daughter. She had been after me since childhood about writing. She thought I should be a magazine writer. That was in the day where magazines were it. But anyway, she died right before the release of that book. So she never knew my publishing journey. But my granny was probably the most instrumental person in my life other than my mother. And one of my fondest memories, and she's probably why I'm a foodie, is there was the dinner hour in the South. It was not, there's breakfast, which you often eat pie at, and especially on holidays, and cake at breakfast. And then there's dinner at 11:30 or noon, and then there's supper, and that is historically correct too. Anyway, she would fix. She was a fabulous cook. She had a fabulous garden. Yes, you know what I'm talking about, girl. And we would sit down around the table, and she served it on this big screened-in porch. It had like 13 or 15 windows. Anyway, then there would be the table, and she would set all the dishes on the table and you would pass them. So there's the dinner, you had the cornbread, you had pork or fried chicken, and you had literally 8 to 10 vegetables. That's the way we ate. And then if there were leftovers, you had that for supper that day. So, no wonder I like food, and I continue to use her recipes and collect aprons to this day. But
I already know that at some point we're going to have to do a video on our grannies.
Oh, we are, with pictures and mementos and everything. Well, mine was Granny Blanton. She married into the Blanton line or clan. It had once been Ballantyne. That's where I got the Ballantyne legacy and my hero, Silas Ballantyne. So, all of our history is kind of, ties into our books. The other thing I'll say real quick is another memory I had of my childhood is of Fort Boonesborough, which my hero, Daniel Boone, founded on the Kentucky River, in the 1700s. when he came into Kentucky. That's a huge bunch of history there. I won't go into it. But when I was a girl, there was not much on that site except a marker and a stone fence of where the original fort stood on the river. And I had always envisioned that they would rebuild that fort, and I would swim in the river all the time, and we would take picnic lunches on the grounds because it wasn't far from our house. And I, just grew up imagining that Daniel Boone living there. His daughter Jemima was taken by the Indians because she got hauled out of a canoe. She disobeyed on the Sabbath, and she had hurt her heel or foot on a piece of cane, which is a very sharp kind of foliage or brush, and she was dangling her foot out of the canoe trying to get some relief in the cold water, and the Indians sprang on her and took her, and they knew she was Daniel Boone's daughter. And so that fuels my books too. Crazy good inspiration. But I always loved it. It wasn't until I was about 18 years old that fort was built on the hill overlooking the river. It wasn't built on the original site. I'm sure there's reasons for that. And it's a fabulous fort. So if you're ever in Kentucky, go to Fort Boonesborough. Their Christmas celebration can't be beat. And anyway.
And there's a place people can travel even now, because it would be opening back up in Kentucky.
Yes, it's just reopened in the last week or two.
That's like a local place to travel. And so there's a place if you can't go across the world just yet.
Right off I-75, the major thoroughfare that cuts through Kentucky down to the real southern parts. So to make time for Fort Boonesborough, you'll feel me there. I've walked there, I've swam there, I've done all kinds of stuff there. And watch for the historic markers.
You'll hear a lot of nice soothing voice in the back of your mind.
Yes, you will. Oh, what a place. I miss it. I miss it so much.
Well, hopefully you'll be back on this side of the world, not too far away, not too long from now.
Hoping the pandemic ends. And I didn't get good news about that this morning when I was at a medical appointment. But anyway, we won't go into that.
That comes down to.
Yeah.
Okay. So
that's why we do an armchair traveler, right?
That's right.
Because of that.
And that's why we're trying to share positive things with you guys, because we're all still making it through.
Yes.
We're making it.
Yes. Wonderful.
So that is our talk for today. Tune in next time when we don't know what exactly we're going to be talking about yet, but we'll let you know when we do. So you guys have a fabulous day.
Bon voyage.